I'm so excited to be here today, and I wanted to take just a second and say thank you. I know that you've heard talk about church planting and the way that you guys have partnered, and you've seen a lot of church planters up close, but I say this all the time. You guys came at a moment in the life of our church that was incredibly pivotal. We had a moment where we were actually trying to get a leased facility. We had people and volunteers, but we didn't have the financial resources at the time, and I got to talk to Pastor Ron and Pastor Teddy, and within about a 2.5-minute conversation, they said, we want to help. We want to figure out a way to make it happen. And because of your generosity to this place and this place's generosity to churches like ours, we were able to get into that lease facility in about 40 days. And so I just wanted to say thank you so much. Thank you for all that you're doing. And so grateful for you and so grateful for Pastor Ron. I love this. You guys know this too. Pastor Ron is just so full of wisdom. I was back there with him for about 10 minutes a few minutes ago, and he said exactly what I needed to hear. How many of you guys, he just said exactly what you needed to hear at some point along the way, which has been amazing. So grateful for you. I want to introduce you real quick to my family. This is us. This is an older picture, but this is my wife, Emily, and then my son, Henry. He would want me to tell you it's Henry Macattack Holden the first, I believe. That's right. And then this is my daughter, Eleanor Kate the Great, Holden the first. And then we decided to make church planting as easy as possible, and we decided to have a baby about 3 weeks before launch. And so this is Oliver Bennett. I know, yeah, I did it for that response. It was great, and just kidding, no. And then so we had a baby 3 weeks before we launched, and that's when I started drinking coffee. But yeah. It was a fun season of our church. And our church is called Nuvo, and our church is fascinating in that we wanted to reach people who didn't know Jesus yet. And about a third of our church would say that they're atheist or agnostic, which is really crazy. We love that, and we say that we're a place for people that can ask questions and engage their faith in that way. And so it's fun. I tell this story all the time, but the guy who ran my sermon slides, right, put scriptures on the screen, was an atheist when we started our church. He came to faith, and then recently got married about 1.5 years ago, and they are having their baby probably any minute right now. And he's one story of so many, and those stories connect with you. And so we're so grateful for Church of the Springs. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at one of my favorite passages of Scripture. I love the passage that we're going to look at. But before we jump in, quick question. How many of you are like outdoorsy people? Do we have any outdoorsy people? Yeah, go ahead and raise your hand. Yeah. How many of you don't understand those people? Anybody in the room? Like you were... Like, what's wrong with them? Like, we conquered it. We got air conditioning and everything now. Why you got to go back out there? Yeah. So I am not. I grew up just me and my mom, single parent home, and our baseball team when I was pretty young, they decided they were going on a camping trip, and so they invited me along. So it was me and all these guys and their dads that went along. So I want to do my best just to take you there real fast. So you can sort of imagine like the wilderness sort of set up. You got the sounds of the wilderness, you know, like there's all these things going on. And so we show up. We get there, we're gonna make camp, whatever that meant to me. I don't know, so fire was involved in this. They set up a fire, we set up the tents, so you can imagine this. We got the tents up that night. And then we were in the tents, it was dark, like pitch black outside. And how many of you you've heard like animals in the bushes when you've been out there, you know what I'm talking about? So this is a first for me. So I looked at the guy, one of the guys that was with us, and if you can picture this guy was like 6'4", I mean, all of this, and then like the biggest beard, like the whole deal. He's like, if there was a man, it was him, you know, like that sort of thing. And I looked at him, I was like, hey, if a bear shows up, like what do we do? And I kid you not, he had a jacket on, he just goes, oh, we'll be fine, and does this, and there is a machete attached to him right here. And I went, this is the safest I've ever felt in my life. Like I was so happy, like, sure, let's do it, whatever, man, I want to see you fight it. So the next day we get up early. And we go on this hike, and we sort of showed up at like this bridge. Now, this bridge is like a nice bridge. This is one of those where you feel safe walking on it. The bridge that we encountered was not that. So if you were to take this bridge about 200 years before, and then it just existed since then, that would have been the one we were on. So it's like, woods, it's like it's chipping, all this kind of stuff. And I'm towards the front of the line of this group of guys that are going, and so we get there, and I see the bridge, I see how far down it is, and I'm like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be like a stewardess. So I just started like welcoming people to the bridge. I'm like, y'all go ahead, just do this. They all sort of walk out, and they all make it across, and then I'm on the other side of the bridge. I'm like, there's no way that I'm going to take that step. And so I'm on the other side of this bridge, and Machete Guy, that I told you about, sees me on the other side. And he comes walking back across. Now, as best you can, I'd love you to visualize this. He comes walking across, and he gets to about like this far away from me. And he looks at me, he's like, hey, we got to get you across the bridge. And I was like, that is a great thought that's not going to happen. I'm just not. And he goes, no. He goes, do you trust me? Which is a fascinating thing to ask like a 9 or 10-year-old kid, because I didn't know him that well. And he said, do you trust me? And I went, I literally was like, yes, yeah. Now, did I lie? For sure. But I'm there, and I go, and here's what he did. He goes, I want you to trust me, take one step at a time. And so every step that I took, he would take like one step back, and we went all the way across this bridge that way. And it was the first time in my life that I can remember, I'm sure there were others, where I had to almost like muster up or force trust in a moment where I didn't actually trust the person. Like, I didn't have necessarily evidence outside of the machete that this guy would have been able to take care of everything. I looked down, I was like, that didn't feel safe. I certainly didn't feel certain about any of it. And the more I think about it, like as I've gotten older, I'm like, that's actually a really great picture of what faith looks like for most people, right? Most people, when it comes to faith or your faith journey, right, if you're here, maybe you gave your life to Christ when you were a kid, and it was like Vacation Bible School, and it was flannel graph and audio adrenaline involved, some sort of big house, and you're like walking. If you got that joke, you've been in church a long time. That's great. And it feels like you're walking without certainty, and every step feels like it reveals a little bit more of what your journey in faith is. Every step, it feels like Jesus shows himself a little bit more. Some of you came to faith in adulthood, and it was like a big, giant leap for you. And the leap was intellectual, right? The leap was like, I feel these things, I sense these things, but I don't know how to like get there. And you sort of feel like this back and forth, and there's not certainty. All there is sort of like, I think I trust, I think I'm moving forward. And then some of you, if you're really honest, and in a church this size, I know this, some of you are not followers of Jesus. And you are here because your spouse made you come, or you're here because there's free childcare for an hour, or there's those versions of it. And there's something about you that looks out and you go, it feels like other people are able to make intellectual jumps or emotional jumps or faith jumps that you haven't. And you're not sure why. And so you look out and there's no certainty. There's just what seems like a weird step to take, right? Now, what's fascinating about the way that we talk about faith now is on this side of history, specifically outside of the text, faith ends up being talked about as if people are certain, right? And that certainty often gets in the way for people who are both followers of Jesus and not followers of Jesus in terms of actually moving forward in it. In fact, most of the stories in the New Testament are wildly ordinary people who seem to just kind of go, I think, you know? And they sort of move forward. So the passage we're going to look at today, it's in an area of the Bible called John. It's John chapter 11. And John's fascinating. So there's 4 gospel accounts, 4 historical accounts of Jesus' life. They're all a little bit different, and they're all a little bit different because of the people who wrote them. And so you get different details, different sort of lenses and perspectives on all this. And the way that John writes is one that has a little bit more of an emotional tone. He's going to tell you a little bit more about what's going on. There's a little bit more detail in some of these passages. And where we're going to pick up is Jesus on this, again, this side of history, we see Jesus as Savior, Messiah, all those things. That side of history, Jesus was a rabbi walking the earth, doing very extraordinary things, teaching very subversive things, and doing miraculous things that drew crowds. So when somebody does something miraculous, people show up to see what he's going to do next. And the assumption as Jesus began to teach and heal and do extraordinary things is that people did want to see what he was going to do next, and his crowds continued to build and build and build and build. And so at the point that we're going to pick up, there's a relationship that he has with a family. The person in this family passes away, and that's where we're going to pick up in the story. So this is John chapter 11, verse 17. Here's what it says. It says, on his arrival, right, Jesus found that Lazarus, who's the person who passed away, had already been in the tomb for 4 days, right? Now, this is significant in the text. I think it's so interesting. Part of this is, in this ancient Jewish culture, there was a belief that the soul sort of still inhabited the body in some form for up to 3 days. So there's something about this 4th day that's really fascinating. Jesus shows up after it's very clear that they're dead. Now, if I were to tell you somebody who's been in the grave for 4 days, we would both agree they're like real dead, right? Like there's a piece of this, they're no longer with us, you know? And so Jesus shows up, and it's almost like this waiting of like, yes, this person is dead, and it's a person that he has these interactions with, and then he's going to have an interaction with the family. And so it goes on in verse 18, and it says this. It says, now Bethany, this area where he's at, was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary, who are the 2 siblings of this person. Martha and Mary, to comfort them in the loss of their brother. So this is one of those moments where everybody just shows up to the house, right? And this is where they come to show up to comfort the people that are grieving. These are the people that show up that you know that you're glad they're there. And then that kind of crazy uncle that you wish maybe wasn't there, like the whole family comes, like everybody comes over. And then there's another group of people that show up who are sort of distantly connected. So a lot of people show up for these moments and have been there for a while. So there's all of these people that Jesus is sort of walking into it. And then you get this juxtaposition between Martha and Mary and their responses. Here's what it says. It says, when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home, right? And this is where a lot of people focus on the text. So you got Martha who goes, engages with Jesus as soon as he shows up, and then Mary who stays back and kind of has, in terms of an assumption, the response that many people would have. Like if you could have healed him, you didn't, right? You could have fixed this, you didn't. You're late, right? She stays back, Martha engages, and what Martha says to Jesus is so fascinating. She says this in verse 21. She says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. And this is a fascinating response. In this moment, she brings herself under his submission by saying, Lord, and then goes, and even now, you can do the miraculous thing in this moment. And Jesus responds, and this, with exactly what you want Jesus to respond with. He says this, he says, your brother will rise again. And so you have this moment where she's looking out going like, you can still do this. Like, Lord, bringing herself under submission, you can still do this. And then Jesus goes, and he will rise again. And then her response sort of goes the other direction a little bit. Here's what she says. She goes, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day, which is kind of like saying, I know at some point there's going to be something beyond this. This is like the heaven nod. But it's almost like it's okay if you maybe not right now. Now, I grew up in two different denominational backgrounds. One of the denominational backgrounds that I grew up in was charismatic Pentecostal on this side. Anybody else grow up in that growing up? Anybody else? Yeah. So you know this guy. So we prayed for everything with full confidence that it was going to happen. So every time I went to Target, God, give me a parking place. Like I was ready to go. Yeah, that's great. I did. Yeah, so there was that. The other side of this was some form of like praying prayers. I went to another denomination later on. And every prayer they prayed, they ended it with like, Lord, if it's your will, let this happen, which is a great prayer to pray as well. Except for the older that I got, I found this. I found that I was praying the Lord, if it be your will, as like a lever that I would pull because I didn't actually have confidence that God was going to show up in the present moment. Lord, if it's your will is a great prayer to pray. And at the same time, it's also a moment that can rob you of the vision that God still does move miraculously today. And so you have this moment that seems like with Martha, where she's kind of going back and forth. And then Jesus responds to her and he says this. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Which is this callback to this, sort of messianic view of who he is and who he's going to be and what he's going to do. And then he says four of the most maddening words in the New Testament. He looks at her, he says, do you believe this? And here's why this is maddening. Because you can't just force yourself to believe something, can you? Right? Do we have any Braves fans in the room? We're in Florida, so there's got to be a few. Do we have any Braves fans? Where are our Braves fans at? Be proud. They're awful this season, but be proud about it, right? Yeah. All right, so huge Braves fan. We actually drove from Ohio so that we could go to Atlanta and watch a Braves game, and they won. The one time this week they won. It was great. So we saw that, and then the next day, I was hanging out. We were at the hotel, and they were like up by 1 run towards the end of the game. And I was talking to a person, and the person I was talking to, they were talking to me about it, and they looked at me like, do you think the Braves are going to win? To which I responded, I don't, because the evidence of this does not show that they're going to win a one-run game. It just doesn't happen. And so I just responded like, absolutely not. They just sort of stared at me for a minute, because they're also a big Braves fan, like I was wrong. To which I could feel their shame and judgment over here, so I did what any good person would do. I lied next. I said, oh, no, I'm just kidding. I think they're going to win. Like whatever that is, And I thought about this. I was like, what's true about this is that you can't force yourself. I cannot force myself to believe something that I didn't. And they lost the game, but we won't talk about that. I couldn't force myself to believe something that I didn't, and you can't either. And you see people try. You see people like try to fake it or try to force it or try to muster it up or try to have these moments where they pretend they have faith that they actually don't. And the problem with that is that belief, it actually encompasses so much of you. It encompasses your mind and your heart and your lived experience. Like some of you believed for a long time from childish sort of faith, and you hit adulthood and then you hit a wall. And the wall that you hit was like life in adulthood. And your childish faith couldn't sustain that. Like the 4 Bible verses that you memorized in the New King James Version didn't do anything to the wall that you hit of pain when you lost somebody and it felt like God didn't show up for you. Or the wall of doubt that you feel when it feels like you outsmarted your faith and it was like somebody poked a hole in the Jenga thing and the whole thing came crumbling down all at once. And you're left with like a version of faith where you believe but ish, or you're disconnected from it, or you're distant. And for a lot of people, what's true is this, that you get to a place where like the full-on belief that you had, it feels like it vanishes like a vapor. And once it's gone, what you're left with is practical atheism. A belief that God is probably real, that Jesus is probably the way, but it's all out there. He's not engaged in your day-to-day life, and you don't act as though he is. And what's fascinating about this text is it's going to do 2 different things. It's going to slice to the heart of that, but it also slices to the heart of a person who's been a follower of Jesus for a long time and is running after it too, right? So here's where it goes on. The next verse says this. She responds back, and she says, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." And this is the I believe statement that's so interesting. She responds back affirmative on this, and she goes this. I believe sort of has 2 different definitions. You know them. The first definition is this, right? The first definition is to consider to be true or honest or accept the word or the evidence of, which means that you believe something is true because you've seen something that has led you to believe it's true. The second one is more interesting to me. The second version of this is to accept something as true, genuine, or real, even if you don't have all of the evidence around you. Some of you knew that the person that you're sitting next to today was the one, and if someone were to ask you how you knew, you would just have gibberish for the answer. Do you know what I'm talking about? How do you know? I just know, or we just chose that, right? You feel that. There are things that feel external that almost draw you into belief. And that's kind of what we see here. I put in my notes to say it this way. The belief is ultimately cultivated through experience, not just knowledge. Now, I'm a little bit of a geek, and I know this. We could talk about Greek all day long in the New Testament. But if you don't have lived experience with faith, it actually often doesn't move you. This is why you've met people who seem to know a lot about the Bible, but not a lot about following Jesus. This is why you have studied or found things, and it's really great to do that, but at the end of the day, it hasn't made its way into your day-to-day life. Because real, genuine faith, don't miss this, doesn't just lead you to blind faith. It leads you to trust in Jesus, which is a different thing. It's a different thing when you're standing at the bridge with the machete guy on the other end, and he's going, "Do you trust me?" And the answer is, "I think." And then you step, and with each step, it becomes more and more revealed. So what happens next in the story is really fascinating. So Martha has this interaction, and then Mary comes running out. And Mary has the most human interaction of the whole thing, right? Here's what it says with Mary. Mary runs out. She reaches the place where Jesus was. She sees him, and she falls at his feet and says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Again, acknowledgement of the extraordinary things that he could do. And then we get this incredibly human moment from Jesus. In verse 33, it says, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. And then he says, "Where have you laid him?" And then the next 2 words are one of the verses that many of you memorized at some point along the way. It says, "Jesus wept," which is both kind of funny because of the easy memorization thing, but also so deeply moving. That the God of the universe was so human that he weeps with the people who are broken and in pain in this moment. And then the crowd that's around, they begin to respond to this, and there's 2 different groups of them. The first group says this, it says, "See how he loved him." And then some of them, who are probably wired more like me, said, "Wait, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man had kept this man from dying?" Which is kind of the logical thing. If you could do the miracle, why didn't you do the miracle? If you could have shown up earlier, why didn't you show up earlier? If you could have, and don't miss this, allowed the pain not to exist, why didn't you solve the problem before the pain came? And then it says this, Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb, and it was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. And he says this, he says, take away the stone. Now, I'm gonna need a little bit of help with this, if I can. Can I snag you real fast? Do you mind coming up here for 1 second? Yeah, come here real quick. Can I snag you? And then these two guys right here. Can I snag both of you for a second? All of these men are stronger than me, so I need all of you to come up on stage real fast. I wanna give you the best visual of this as I can as they're coming up, right? You have this really large sort of cave, and then in the cave, you would have had a multi-ton rock that would have been rolled away. Now, you can stand right here. Tell me your name real quick. What's your name?
Joey.
Joey. Everybody say hey to Joey. What's your name?
Tyson.
Tyson. Everybody say to Tyson. What's your name?
Steve.
Steve. Steve has the best shirt, everybody. Kennedy Space Center. That's amazing. I llove it. Big NASA fan over here. That's great. All right. So I want you to envision this. Jesus is about to raise somebody from the dead, right? This is what's about to happen in the text. But before he does, he brings up these guys and he looks at Joey, right? Joey. Yeah. And he goes, Joey, I want you to move this rock. So Joey, I want you to do this for me. I want you to pretend like you're moving this rock. Go ahead and show him your guns. Go ahead. Let's flex for him. Go ahead. Yeah, you did. Come on, everybody. I love that you're filming this. Get all of it. That's great. Hashtag Church at the Springs. Let's go, people. All right, here we go. All right, so he's moving that rock. Now, Joey's strong, but he can't do it on his own, right? So he comes over, and he says, all right, I want you to do this as well. So now they're both pushing. Go ahead, keep pushing. Go ahead. Yeah, that's good. Push hard. Let's see what you got. Yeah. I'm enjoying this. Are you enjoying this? This is kind of fun. Yeah, they're pushing. All right, and then neither one of them can get it, and then he walks over, and he goes, wait, hold on. Let me show you what's up. I got my Kennedy Space Center shirt on. Let's go NASA. Let's do it right here. And then he comes over, and the three of them start pushing. Push with everything you got. Come on, just give it up for these three guys. They push. They go, yeah. Multi-ton. That's fantastic. All right, hop on off. Thank you guys so much. Now, this visual is so important to me because it's ordinary people that he called out from this crowd of people grieving with them and the skeptics. Now, Jesus is about to raise this person from the dead. Track with me for a second. But before he does, he invites ordinary people to join him in the miracle. Now, if I'm gonna raise somebody from the dead and there's a big rock in the middle, I'm about to Yoda this thing and it's gonna be a whole moment. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, I'm about to make this something. Jesus invites the ordinary people around to get involved in the miracle. I put it in my notes, I said it this way. I said that what Jesus seemingly leaves unfinished is an invitation to gather and to join him in what he's doing around you. So whether you're a person who's been a follower of Jesus for a long time and just full of faith, or you're a person with a fullness of your doubts and questions, not even sure what you believe, this is actually the answer to moving forward in your faith. Jesus invites people from both groups to join in being a part of the miracle that he's doing, right? Now, what happens next is fascinating. I had it in my head a little bit different. What he does is he calls Lazarus out. He literally yells Lazarus' name. Lazarus comes out. Here's what the text said. It goes on and it says, the dead man came out, his hands and his feet wrapped with strips of linen and cloth around his face. Now, I'm in Ohio, so I just grew up sort of thinking, if you're gonna come out of the grave and Jesus did it, you look a little bit more like LeBron James coming out. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like whatever the powder stuff is, and you're doing this sort of thing, like everybody comes out ready to go. It was much more like this, right? It was much more like somebody like wrapped in some sort of, like whatever version of this there is. The other fascinating thing about this tomb is there would have been multiple steps. He would have had to walk up. Can you imagine walking up wrapped in this sort of thing? What Jesus does is he leaves something unfinished, invites people to be a part of it in the beginning. He does the miracle, and then what Jesus simply says after the miracle is this. He goes on and he says, take off the grave clothes and let him go. To the onlookers to the miracle, he invites them to be a part of the miraculous thing on the other side of it too. Now here's why this matters so much, because I don't think this is something that's just tethered to this time period. I talk to people all the time at our church. So many of them, atheist, agnostic, every intellectual objection you can have to faith, I get to hear it. This is what I do for fun. And then I talk to people who've been a follower of Jesus for a long time, and they wouldn't say it quite like this, but they're apathetic and they're a little bit bored when it comes to their faith. And I would say, in either one of those directions, the answer is to move forward with steps that Jesus is calling you to have when it comes to your faith. I put in my notes, I said, God is inviting me to intentionally participate in the miracles that he is doing in my world. And you only see that when you are looking and choosing to be a part of those miracles. About 4 months ago, I was talking to a friend of mine. My friend's name is Doug, and Doug was a few seasons of life ahead of me. So he has students in college, or out of college now, and then one that's in high school. And this high school student, it was his last year, so he's a senior, he's graduating. And he calls me up one day, and he said, hey, we have so many people at our church that are new to faith, or people that are agnostic or atheists that are coming to faith. And then he said this, which again got me thinking a lot of what we're talking about today. He said this, he goes, there's a lot of people that would say they're followers of Jesus, but their faith, it doesn't feel dead. It just feels like not activated. And he goes, what do we do about that? And he goes, in my heart, this is what he said, my heart specifically is for the men around this. And I was kind of busy, so I'm listening, and I'm kind of going back and forth, and he's telling me about it, and I agree with him, but I wouldn't know that I was fully engaged the whole time. But he wraps it up, and the way that he wrapped it up was he said this. He said, hey, I really want to continue to give my life to pour into those people. And that was a conversation we had several months ago. But 2 weeks after that conversation, Doug was on his way to marry a couple that he had been mentoring for the last few years. And on the way, he passed away, suddenly, unexpectedly, seemingly out of nowhere. And I was very close to Doug. We were very close. He was a part of our church since before it was a church, from the very beginning days, right? He was a Little League coach for years and years and years and years. And I mean, he did all sorts of things. Married couple counseling. He did pre-marriage stuff. So after he passed away, they asked me to do his funeral. And I said yes, and one of the things that I got to do was interview the people who knew him. So obviously his family, but then I started running into men who knew him. And as I would run into these men, they all had some version or something to say around how Doug poured his life out for me, or Doug poured into me in some way, or Doug showed up here randomly. And he would do this with me too. I started coaching Little League a few years ago, and he knew where I was at, and knew I was at one day, and catcher's equipment and 20 balls just showed up in my car. I'm like, number one, how did you get in my car? But we won't talk about that. Number two, he just gave himself away. We'd talk family and ministry stuff, all of this. And so at his funeral, they rented out this really large venue. And I was struck by this. There were certainly women in the room, but there were tons of men, high school boys, 20-somethings, peers that he had, people that were older than him, all of these men in the room. And so that night at the end, what I did is I had all the men stand up. And I challenged them with something that I'm going to challenge many of you with today, is that there are some of us, when it comes to the apathy or the boredom when it comes to our life and faith, that have settled into it. And then there are some of us, when it comes to growing in a person who is discovering if Christianity is true or not, you're intellectually curious to the point of watching TikTok videos, to get the sound bites, but not deep enough to discover, is the person of Jesus real? And one of their things that their family did is they gave me his journal, where he would write 1 or 2 sentences a day over the course of, don't miss this, about a 25-year period. And this is what got me as I got to read it. It was all the highs you would expect, most of the lows that you would expect. But for a person who had followed Jesus this long, there was also the middle sort of gaps of uncertainty and questions and doubts. And having watched this and seen him write about it and see how he engaged with it, and I miss this. What I discovered and what I saw is this: that in real time, a person who experienced the doubts and questions and uncertainty and all the ups and downs and every bit of it, he chose action in those moments over apathy. So what we're going to do today is going to feel a little unconventional for some of us, and it's true of both men and women. But I want to specifically talk to the men today. So here's what I ask you to do. If you are a middle school student or above, and you are a man in the room, I'm going to ask you to stand up for 1 minute. Every man in the room, stand up. 1 second. Here's what I know, statistically, right? Statistically, some of you are in the room and you're like white hot when it comes to Christianity and faith and moving forward. And what I would tell you is this: there is more than you've experienced. Don't stop. So if you're here and you're like, I am chasing after it, I am desperate for God, all those things, there is only more. There is only ever more. Keep going. And then if you're here and you're on the other side of the spectrum and you're going like, I'm curious about faith, I'm kind of in it, kind of not, I mean, you're here, so you're like enough in it to be curious, but you've not taken the step to follow Jesus. I'm going to say some of you have not taken that step simply because you haven't wanted to take a step. And so I'm going to challenge some of you today, it's time for you to take that step to say, Jesus, I give you my life, I'm going to follow you. But then there's a subset that I would say this: the step for you to take is to go, I'm going to choose to devote the next 3, 6, 9 months, a year of my life to figuring out if it's true or not. And you decide to do that starting today. And then what I think is probably the larger swath of men that I meet in general is you don't know why you're bored, but you are. You don't know why you're apathetic, but you are. And you're waiting on something to change when God is calling you to be the one to take the step to experience the change, to take a step on that bridge and say, I'm going to follow you, reveal yourself to me. If you haven't prayed a prayer in the last month that is beyond your control to facilitate, this is you. If you haven't begged God to move in an area of your life, this is you. If you only find yourself tired, this is you. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pray for each of those segments today. Before we do, what I'm going to ask you to do, and this is the part that feels unconventional, I'm going to ask you to hold out your hands like this. There's a lawyer that wrote about this, and he'd say, every time I put somebody on the stand, I would have them rest their hands open-handedly on their knees, and as a sign of like posturing to be open-handed with it. And there's nothing magical about this except for physiologically, it just forces you to think that you're open-handed. And we're going to ask you to be open-handed today. Let me pray for us. Jesus, for the person who is not a follower of you yet, and today is the day that they're going to choose to take that step. God, I pray that right now they would simply say, Jesus, I trust you, and I follow you, and I'm going to follow you with my life. For the person in the room who's not a follower of you, and they're going, I don't know what to do yet, I don't believe, I don't know the evidence, I have all sorts of questions. I pray that today is the day that they choose to take a step and commit the next part of their journey to really leaning in and discovering this. And I pray that through the power of your Holy Spirit that you reveal yourself to them over and over and over again in tangible ways. Pray for the people in the room who are like white hot when it comes to their faith. God, we need them to be white hot. I pray that they would only embrace the thought and the idea that there is more and that they find you in this infinite pursuit of giving their life away. And I pray that they continue to become the spiritual fathers of the 20-somethings and 30-somethings, 40-somethings, 50-somethings who need it. And then I pray for this middle section of men who are bored and they're apathetic and practically they live their life as an atheist. And I pray that this moment would disrupt all of those things. And God, right now they know the step they need to take. Some of them, it's a version of serving. For some of them, it's a version of praying differently. For some of them, it's a financial thing. They hold on to self-sufficiency and security, but they're going to open their hands to that. And then for some of them, it's just responding back to their first love, and we ask that you would help them to do that. And lastly, we just pray that a year from now, the hundreds of people in this room, that the stories that get told are of the ways that they poured themselves out on behalf of other people, and you did extraordinary things. So in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. You can go ahead and have a seat.